Trion Railways was a British manufacturer of toy trains, one of the elements of the Lines Bros Ltd company who traded using the brands Trion, Minic, Pedigree, and Frog. The Trion Railways name was dropped a few years after Lines Brothers took over the Hornby name, although the majority of the trains were still the original Trion models. The brothers George and Joseph Lines made wooden toys in the Victorian age, their company being G&J Lines Ltd. Joseph was the active partner while George went into farming. Joseph, or Joe, had 4 sons. 3 of these, William, Walter, and Arthur Edwin Lines, formed Lines Bros Ltd shortly after World War I. 3 lines make a triangle, hence the Trion. Arthur's son, Richard Lines, was largely responsible for the Trion railway system. Rovex Plastics Ltd was founded just after World War II in 1946 by Alexander Gregory Venezian, who made toys for Marks & Spencer. Venezian was asked to develop an electric toy train set for Christmas 1950. He delivered the product, but, although the company had found larger premises in a former brewery in Richmond, it was constrained financially. Lines Brothers were looking to expand into railways, and so they purchased Rovex. Their products would be sold under the Trion Railways name from 1951. To give room for development, they moved the company, now Rovex Scale Models Ltd, to a brand new factory built at Margate, in Kent, in 1954. As well as 00/H0 gauge, Trion made TT gauge models from 1957 to at least 1967. The 3mm Society supports those who still model Trion TT. Trion also manufactured a garden railway system called Trion Minic Narrow Gauge Railway, thus being known as TMNR. This was a 10.25 gauge passenger carrying system using 2-rail electric pickup with motors running at 40 volts DC. This was produced in the early 1960s and not a commercial success, with less than 90 sets being produced. The success of Trion meant that British competitors Trix and Hornby were affected. In 1964, Hornby, a division of Meccano Ltd, had stopped production, and Meccano Ltd invited Lines Bros Ltd to buy them out. Trion purchased the company, including a large amount of stock. The combined toy railways was marketed as Trion Hornby, although the vast majority of the models was all Trion. The Lines Brothers empire itself collapsed in 1971 and was broken up. The model railways, then marketed as Trion Hornby, were sold to the Dunby Kumbex Marks Group, but the rights to the Trion brand were sold elsewhere. Accordingly, the Hornby name being established and recognized, from January 1, 1972, the model railways were rebranded Hornby Railways. A number of Trion models specific to Australia were produced by Moldex in Melbourne during the 1960s, including NSW 1955 type suburban electric motor car and driving trailer car, Victorian B-class double-ended diesel locomotive in Trans-Australia livery, a blue version of NSW 1955 type suburban cars pretending to be a Victorian EMU was planned but never produced. Other models were manufactured in Auckland, New Zealand, and were mainly the same as those made in England, although there were interesting variations. The Australian and New Zealand models were produced in 00 gauge only. Lines Brothers, Canada, Limited was originally incorporated on the March 24, 1947. The trademark used in Canada was that of the Thistle, which had first been registered by Joseph Lines, the co-founder of G&J Lines Ltd, in 1910. The main factory and warehouse facility was located at 4000 St. Patrick Street, Montreal, Quebec. The Canadian company struggled to make acceptable profits, and it was thought that profits could be increased with a wider range of toys to market. The Trion Railways transcontinental range of models was devised specifically with this in mind, and by Christmas 1954 the first sets began to appear in the shops. However, the models were produced too quickly, without sufficient attention to detail, and lacked realism. Without proper consideration to what the Canadian market demanded, the models were not popular, although they sold well enough in the UK. Historically, standard train sets were imported into Canada from the UK, initially only the transcontinental range of models. However, between 1957 and 1974, a number of sets were produced exclusively for the general Canadian market, as well as some special sets commissioned by department store chains and / or mail order companies, including Simpsons and Simpsons Sears, Eaton's, Woodward's and the Hudson's Bay Company. No models were made in Canada, but the Canadian company assembled a wide range of sets from both boxed and unboxed models sent out to them from the Margate factory. From 1965, a new full-color Canadian catalogue was produced, where previously the UK catalogue had been used and supplemented, up until 1962, by an illustrated price list. Initially, a number of Canadian National Railway (CNR) models were introduced specifically for the Canadian market. Later, in 1967, models representing the Canadian Pacific Railway (CPR) began to appear. Of note were the representations of the transcontinental passenger trains, which have become firm favorites with collectors of Triangle Railways. A limited number of models were manufactured in Durban, South Africa. These are very rare,